Hey, Michael here. I've had some very challenging times here, and what I've had was, well, a part that's supposed to turn out like this has turned out like this, where the printer's just failed mid-print. Does that focus? Come on, focus. Focus. And, oh, there we go. So you can see it's just made a mess of that. Another example, and it's just stopped and given me errors like change filament. Now the printer that I'm using is not smart enough to detect filament. It doesn't have a filament detector, so it's really not. How can I say? It's a strange error code. You know, it's been beeping and carrying on and doing all sorts of weird things. And I was beside myself trying to figure out why this is so. Now, let me just go to another computer. Now this is, I'm running a virtual environment here. It's actually running on another computer. Here's the slicer on the other machine, which was working correctly. Let's just add a design. Yep, that's it, I think. There we go. So this is the part now loaded on the other machine. Let's have a look at the slicing. Okay, so that there, where's my camera gone? Where are you? I'll keep you on every desktop, so you follow me around. Okay, we're up there. All right, so on this machine, that everything's working fine. I went through and had a look at the settings. I pretty much exhausted my possibilities as to what sort of settings I had here. Visually, I couldn't really pick anything. So what I found was a good method for helping resolve this was the code that was failing, and this was the code that was working. And I spent some time analysing what's the difference, and really the only code difference that I could find going through the whole design is this business here with the acceleration and so forth. And what appeared to be the cause of that, there were two settings that I was fiddling with to resolve that. On this guy, this is Prusa Slicer 2.1, there's stealth mode here, which is to make your printer run quieter. Well, I've disabled that, and it is a Marlin system, but Marlin, the Marlin setting here, as well as that stealth, somehow wasn't playing nice. So I set it back to rep wrap, and I ended up with a successful print, being this one. But also I found in that the bottom of the print was a mess because it was the wrong height, and I didn't really spot it here, but it turned out being the Z offset. Now on this one, I'm not going to put it quite so low as on the other unit. I had I believe, where are we now? Printer settings, Z offset, set to -1mm. Now the advantage of me having it lower like that was I've got like 3 springs on the height adjustable bed on the Delta, and those 3 springs, obviously the more compressed they are, the better they are for stability, and the more released they are, the worse they are. So rather than me going into the firmware and tweaking the firmware file every time I fiddled with the bed, I just added a tweak in the slicer, but I'd forgotten about that by the time I'd come to set up the slicer on this machine. So I've gone a little bit less extravagant on that, but that became obvious to me when I read this. You can see a first Z, that's set to 5, that's cool. That's the same command here as here. Maybe I'll just line these up a little bit so it's not so crazy. Alright, so the first Z command on this one here, which was the one that worked fine, which was created by the other machine, is -0.6mm. Whereas here, where is the first Z? 0.35. So there's basically a millimetre difference really between those two heights. So that gave me a clue as to what's going on with the heights there. So in any case, a clear text editor with a big buffer capacity that can take like gigabytes. Pluma is what I'm using here. If you're using Linux, you use something like Pluma. There's a lot of text editors on Linux, so it's not. If you are using Linux, you probably already know about that. On Windows, you might have to download something. I don't know what's there, but I'm sure there's some good text editors you can get. But WordPad doesn't do it, and if you use like Word, it also doesn't do it, because what those sorts of programs do is they embellish things with headers, and they're like markup language type arrangements, and so you need to have something that just gives you the text you have on the screen is exactly the text that's in the file. There's no sort of fancy special information about the text or any extra file extensions or anything like that. It leaves everything clean. The file you see there, the file extension and everything is exactly as written. The text inside the file is exactly what you see on the screen. There's no font chosen or that sort of guff. It's just simply the text only. That's very important. Okay, so a decent text editor with a reasonable capacity. So you might have, I don't know, how big is that file for argument's sake? Let's have a wee look. That one's a megabyte, right? So that in itself's not a huge thing. But if you've got a more complex G code that you're trying to debug, you need a text editor that can go out maybe to gigabytes. I've tested this to 10 gigabytes just by like copy and paste. So it's huge amounts of data, and Bloomer holds up beautifully. I'm sure there's plenty others that do. Alright, so by looking at the clear text, which is what the G code is, it's nice clear text, it's human readable, a little bit abstract, but it's human readable. You can see what might be a difference in the G code between two different systems, and you can say, oh, okay, that's something's going on about that. Why am I setting accelerations, etc., when the other one doesn't? What is it in the slicer? Anyhow, all I could find about that was the stealth mode. So that was all I managed to find there. But that's the method I used, and that's a good way, an easy way of debugging your G code. So if your slicer's doing something weird, you can look in the G code, see what it's actually generating. You've got to remember that your 3D printer is actually quite a dumb machine. It literally does whatever that says. If that's crashing into the bed, it'll just do it. You can even have the machine sort of self-destruct. It doesn't. The G code is just literally obeyed without any sort of filtering whatsoever. This is what the printer will do, and that's that. So it doesn't care whether it's destroying itself or if it's doing the wrong thing. It's just going to literally obey this. But it also means, because it's a text editor, if you wanted to try whether something is going to affect you, you can actually just comment out a command or change a value or whatever to experiment to see what that does, if you like. So that's another advantage of the text editor. So you can play with the design very, very easily. Alright, well, I guess that's it. If you've come up with these sorts of problems and your method's a bit different to mine, feel free to write something in the comment. I guess feel free to like, share, subscribe, ask a question, leave a comment, like I said. Bye for now.